They had watched Earth for almost 100 years before they decided to make contact. They sent tiny probes that floated high above human cities. They listened to radio signals and studied television broadcasts. They read human books and watched human movies. And after all that time, they came to a simple conclusion. Humans were soft creatures who posed no threat to anyone. The collective was a group of 7 alien species who had lived together in peace for thousands of years. They controlled hundreds of star systems and had technology that humans could only dream about. When their scientists presented their final report on humanity, the collective's leaders nodded in agreement. Humans fought small wars among themselves, yes, but they always seemed to regret it afterward. They wrote poems about peace. They built monuments to their dead. They created organizations meant to prevent future conflicts. Clearly, this was a species that had grown tired of violence. Ambassador Aura was chosen to lead the first contact mission. Aura belonged to a species made of living crystal, tall and beautiful, with a body that caught light and scattered it into rainbows. The ambassador had dealt with dozens of newly spacefaring species before, and humans seemed like they would be the easiest yet. The meeting took place on Earth's moon in the year 2157. Commander Jack led the human delegation. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had fought in 3 wars before joining the space program, and his body carried the proof. A long scar ran down his left cheek. His right hand was missing 2 fingers, replaced by simple mechanical ones. But when he shook Aura's crystalline hand, he smiled warmly and spoke soft words of welcome. Standing beside him was Dr. Lisa, a woman in her 40s who studied alien languages. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she spent the entire first meeting asking questions about art and music. The third member of the human team was Sergeant Danny Vega, a quiet man who stood in the corner and said almost nothing. He watched everything with dark eyes that never seemed to blink. Aura found the humans charming. They were so eager to learn, so grateful for the opportunity to join the galactic community. When the ambassador returned to the collective's capital world, the report was glowing. Humans would make excellent trading partners. They produced beautiful art and fascinating culture. Their scientists were clever, their doctors were skilled, and their engineers could fix almost anything. Most importantly, they showed no signs of military ambition. The collective welcomed humanity with open arms. For the next 15 years, humans spread slowly into the galaxy. They built colonies on 3 small worlds at the edges of collective space, always asking permission first, always thanking everyone for the opportunity. Human doctors traveled to alien worlds to help fight diseases. Human engineers helped repair old space stations. Human artists performed concerts that drew audiences from dozens of species. They grew to see humans as something like pets, useful, friendly, and completely harmless. Some of the other species in the collective even joked about it. Why did humans smile so much? Why did they apologize for everything? Why did they seem so obsessed with making everyone comfortable? Commander heard these jokes sometimes during diplomatic meetings. He never responded with anger. He just smiled that same warm smile and changed the subject. Doctor noticed that his mechanical fingers would tap against his leg when this happened, a small rhythm that meant nothing to the aliens but everything to her. She had known Jack for 20 years. She knew what that tapping meant. He was counting, remembering, holding something back. They studied human history, but they studied it selectively. They read about human peace movements and human charities. They watched movies about love and friendship. They listened to songs about hope and healing. What they did not study was the other side of human history. They did not read about the trenches of ancient wars where millions died in the mud. They did not learn about the cities that humans had burned to ash. They did not understand what it meant when old soldiers gathered together and shared looks that needed no words. Danny Vega was one of those old soldiers. He had fought in urban warfare for 8 years before joining the space program. He had seen things that still visited him in his dreams. But when aliens looked at him, They saw only a quiet man with sad eyes. They assumed he was shy or perhaps not very intelligent. They never asked about the scars hidden beneath his uniform or the medals locked away in a box he never opened. There were thousands like Danny scattered across the human colonies, men and women who had served in Earth's conflicts and then quietly retired to new lives among the stars. They became farmers and teachers and shopkeepers. They raised families and grew gardens and never spoke about the past. They saw them as proof that humans had evolved beyond violence. They could not have been more wrong. On the colony world of Harvest 3, a man named Cole woke every morning before sunrise. He was 63 years old, with a titanium knee that ached when storms approached and hands that still remembered how to field strip a rifle in the dark. Grew vegetables now. He sold them at the local market and played chess with his neighbors in the evenings. The aliens who visited the colony thought he was a sweet old man. Let them think that. It was easier that way. He kept a locked box under his bed, just like Danny Vega did, just like thousands of other veterans did across human space. Inside that box was a uniform that still fit, medals that still shone, and memories that never faded. Hoped he would never need to open that box again. He had given enough of himself to war. He wanted to spend his remaining years in peace. But he was not foolish enough to believe that peace would last forever. He had lived too long and seen too much to believe in fairy tales. So every morning after tending his garden and before opening his market stall, walked to a quiet spot behind his farmhouse. And there, where no one could see him, he practiced. His movements were slower than they used to be, but they were still precise, still deadly. Just in case. They never noticed these quiet morning rituals. They never saw the way veterans nodded to each other when they passed on the street, a small gesture of recognition that crossed all borders and all generations. They never understood that humanity's kindness was not weakness. It was a choice, and choices could be changed. Far away, in the dark spaces between stars, something was stirring. A species called the had grown tired of the collective's rules. They wanted to expand, to conquer, to take what they believed was rightfully theirs. And they had identified their first target. A small, undefended human colony on a world called Harvest 3. They expected an easy victory. They had no idea what was coming. The ships appeared in the sky above Harvest 3 on a quiet Tuesday morning. Cole was watering his tomatoes when he heard the distant thunder of engines breaking through the atmosphere. He looked up and saw the dark shapes descending through the clouds, and something cold settled in his stomach. He had seen ships like that before. Not these exact ships, but ships with that same purpose. Ships that came to kill. He dropped his watering can and ran. They were a reptilian species, tall and covered in thick green scales. They had been part of the collective for centuries, but they had always resented the peace that kept them from expanding their territory. Their leaders believed in strength and conquest. They saw the other species as weak, especially the humans who smiled and apologized and never raised their voices. When the High Command decided to break away from the collective, they chose Harvest 3 as their first target specifically because it was human. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to show the galaxy what happened to soft species who stood in their way. 8,000 people lived on Harvest 3. Most of them were farmers and traders and families with young children. They expected them to surrender within hours. They landed 5,000 soldiers and set up a command post at the edge of the main settlement. Their commander, a massive reptile named, broadcast a simple message to the colony's communication system. Humans, you have 1 hour to surrender. Lay down any weapons and present yourselves in the central square. Resistance will result in death. You have no chance. Make the smart choice. Heard this message while he was running toward the community center where emergency meetings were held. By the time he arrived, 30 other people had already gathered inside. Most of them were scared. Some were crying. But notice something else too. In the crowd, scattered among the frightened civilians, he saw familiar faces, old faces. faces with scars and steady eyes. Veterans like him. A woman named stepped forward. She was 58 years old, with silver hair tied back in a practical knot. 20 years ago, she had commanded a combat unit in one of Earth's ugliest wars. Now she ran the colony's only bakery. "How many of us are there?" she asked, her voice calm. Did a quick count. 47, maybe 50 if the Hendersons made it. Weapons. Whatever we can find, mining equipment, farm tools. Some of us kept our personal sidearms. Nodded slowly. She looked around the room at the frightened faces of the civilians, then back at the veterans who had quietly gathered near the walls. Something passed between them. No words were needed. They all understood. "Get the families into the underground storage bunkers," said. "The ones used for storm shelter. They're deep enough to protect from bombardment." She turned to. "You still remember how to make a surprise package?" Smiled. It was not a nice smile. Some things you never forget. The next hour was chaos, but it was organized chaos. Civilians were guided to safety, while veterans raided the mining company's storage facilities. They found explosives meant for clearing rock, chemicals used for processing ore, and metal pipes that could be turned into weapons. Worked with practiced hands, building devices that the scanners would never recognize as threats. Once deadline passed and no humans appeared in the central square, he ordered his troops to advance into the settlement. They expected to find cowering civilians hiding in their homes. Instead, they found empty streets and dark buildings. Then they found the bombs. The first explosion took out an entire squad. The second destroyed a supply vehicle. By the time the third bomb went off, the aliens were in full panic mode. They fired their weapons at shadows, at windows, at anything that moved. But there was nothing to hit. The humans had vanished like ghosts. Watched from a carefully hidden position on a rooftop. He had a rifle now, an old hunting weapon that one of the farmers had kept in his barn. It was not a military weapon, but it did not need to be. Had been a sniper once, long ago. He still knew how to wait. He still knew how to breathe. He still knew how to make every shot count. He took his first target at 300 meters. A clean hit. The officer dropped without a sound. By the time his soldiers realized what had happened, had already moved to a new position. This was how the next 6 days went. They had numbers and technology, but the humans had something else. They had experience. They had patience. And they had absolutely nothing left to lose. Coordinated the defense from a hidden basement, using old radio equipment that the aliens could not trace. She directed teams of 3 or 4 veterans to strike and disappear, to hit supply lines and communication relays, to make the invaders feel like they were fighting an army of thousands instead of fewer than 50. Danny, a 60-year-old man who had lost his leg in combat decades ago and now walked with a prosthetic, led a raid on the fuel depot. He moved silently through the night, his artificial leg making no more noise than his flesh one had, and planted charges that turned the depot into a fireball visible from orbit. Susan Park, 52 and grandmother to 3, used her knowledge of the colony's tunnel system to lead ambushes that killed dozens of enemies without losing a single human life. She had been a combat engineer in her youth. She still thought like one. The commander grew desperate. He called for reinforcements, but his communication systems kept failing. He tried to use his ships to bombard the settlement, but the humans had hidden the civilians too well, and destroying empty buildings accomplished nothing. His soldiers were terrified. They jumped at every sound. They saw enemies everywhere. On the 6th day, Commander Jack arrived with the rescue fleet. The ship Endurance descended through the atmosphere with weapons hot, ready for a desperate fight. Instead, found the force broken and retreating. 300 alien soldiers dead, 11 humans lost. Walked through the settlement, past the wreckage of destroyed vehicles and the bodies of fallen invaders. He found sitting on a burned-out tank, cleaning his rifle with slow, careful movements. The old man looked tired, but his hands were steady. "I thought you were retired," said. Did not look up from his work. "I thought so too. The collective is calling this a miracle. They don't understand how you did it." Now looked up and his eyes were hard as iron. "That's because they've never seen what humans can do when our families are in danger. They studied our peace. They should have studied our wars." Sat down beside him on the tank. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just watched the smoke rise from the alien encampment and listened to the distant sound of ships evacuating the survivors. "This isn't over," said finally. "They won't forget this." Nodded. "I know. We're going to need people like you, like all of them." Looked down at his rifle, then out at the fields he had worked so hard to cultivate. His peaceful life, his quiet retirement. He had known it couldn't last. He had always known. "Then you'd better start making calls," he said, "because there are a lot more of us out there, and most of us have been waiting for this moment for a very long time." News from Harvest 3 spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every species in the collective heard the story of 50 human farmers who had defeated 5,000 soldiers. At first, most of them did not believe it. There had to be some mistake, some hidden military force, some secret weapon. But there was no mistake. The reports were clear. Ordinary humans, most of them old enough to have, had fought like demons and won. The collective's intelligence services scrambled to understand how this was possible. They pulled up old records, studied ancient footage, and finally began to read the parts of human history they had ignored before. What they found frightened them. Ambassador Aura sat alone in a darkened office, watching recordings of human conflicts from centuries past. The crystalline being saw images of soldiers charging through mud and fire, cities burning, weapons that could destroy entire nations. And through it all, the faces of humans who kept fighting even when all hope seemed lost. "We were fools," Aura whispered to no one. "We saw what we wanted to see." Meanwhile, they were not sitting still. Their leaders were furious about the humiliation at Harvest 3. They attacked 2 more human colonies in rapid succession, and this time they showed no mercy. They burned settlements to the ground. They killed everyone they found. They wanted revenge, and they did not care who paid the price. On Earth, Admiral Torres received the reports in her office at Fleet Command. She was 61 years old, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had commanded warships during the worst years of humanity's internal conflicts. She had given orders that sent thousands to their deaths. She had won battles that should have been impossible to win. She had hoped to never do any of that again. Read the reports 3 times, each time feeling the old familiar coldness settle into her bones. They had killed over 12,000 civilians. Men, women, children. All dead because the galaxy's bullies thought humans were easy targets. She picked up her secure communicator and made a call to the Outer Colonies Council. The conversation was short. "Issue the recall," she said, "all of them." The recall was a secret code that had been established decades ago, during humanity's first expansion into space. Every veteran who left Earth knew about it. Every veteran who settled on distant colonies carried a small device that would receive the signal. The message was simple: humanity needs you. Chris was making bread when his device began to blink. He was 54 years old, and he had run a bakery on Luna for the past 20 years. His husband, a quiet man named, found him standing in the kitchen, staring at the small blinking light. "What is it?" asked. Chris did not answer for a long moment. Then he untied his apron, folded it carefully, and set it on the counter. "I have to go." "Go where?" "To war." His face went pale. He had known about Chris's past, of course. Everyone on Luna knew that the friendly baker had once been one of the deadliest snipers in the military. But that had been so long ago. It seemed like another life. "Chris, you're 54. Your back hurts when it rains. You can't possibly." Chris crossed the kitchen and took his husband's hands. His eyes were kind but firm. "People are dying, people like us, families, children. I spent 20 years pretending I was done with that part of my life, but I'm not. I never was, I just didn't have a reason to remember." He kissed gently and walked out of the bakery, leaving everything behind. Across human space, similar scenes played out thousands of times. Kate, a 48-year-old school teacher who had lost her left arm in combat, reported to the nearest recruitment center. She brought her prosthetic arm with her, the advanced combat model she had kept maintained all these years, just in case. The young officer at the desk looked at her gray-streaked hair and confused expression. "Ma'am, I think you might be in the wrong place." Kate smiled pleasantly and handed over her service record. The officer's face went white as he read it. "I apologize, Colonel. We've prepared a shuttle for you." On a mining station in the asteroid belt, a man named Roberto Santos heard the recall while eating lunch with his crew. He was 60 years old, with a broad face and gentle hands that seemed made for careful work. His had never seen him angry. They had never seen him raise his voice. They had certainly never suspected that he had once led special operations teams into the most dangerous war zones on Earth. Roberto finished his lunch calmly, cleaned his dishes, and then announced that he was taking emergency leave. When his supervisor asked why, Roberto just looked at him with eyes that had suddenly gone cold and flat. "Personal business," he said, and no one asked any more questions. The gathering was slow at first, but it built momentum like a wave building toward shore. Hundreds became thousands. Thousands became tens of thousands. Old soldiers who had not worn uniforms in decades dusted off their skills. They trained on colony worlds and space stations. They taught younger volunteers what they knew. And slowly, an army began to take shape. Admiral Torres watched the numbers grow from her command center. She had expected a few thousand volunteers. She got over 50,000 in the first week alone. Men and women from every colony, every station, every corner of human space. Most of them were old. Most of them had physical limitations. But all of them had one thing in common. They remembered how to fight, and they remembered why. Dr. Lisa visited the diplomatic station during this time. Ambassador Aura requested a meeting, desperate to understand what was happening. "We have observed your mobilization," the ambassador said, its crystalline body flickering with nervous light. "We do not understand. Your veterans are old. Many have injuries. How can they possibly fight?" Lisa sat across from the towering alien, her expression calm and serious. "You studied us for 100 years, Ambassador. You watched our movies and listened to our music. You read our poetry about peace. Yes, we thought we understood. You understood one half of us, the half we show to the world when we're not threatened. But there's another half, a darker half, the half that comes out when our homes are in danger and our people are dying." Aura leaned forward, genuinely confused. "But your veterans are farmers now, teachers, bakers. How can they simply become soldiers again?" Lisa stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried weight that filled the room. "A wolf can live peacefully among sheep for many years, Ambassador. It can graze in the fields and sleep under the same sun, but it never stops being a wolf. And when the sheep are threatened, the wolf remembers what it is." She turned back to face the alien, and there was something ancient in her eyes. "You're about to see what happens when the wolves stop pretending." The fleet arrived at Eth Station with 200 warships. They came in attack formation, weapons charged, ready to claim the neutral trading hub as their forward base for expansion into collective space. Their commander, High General, had promised his people a swift and glorious victory. He expected to be celebrated as a conqueror. Eth Station was home to 3 million beings from dozens of different species. It was the largest trading hub in the region, a place where cultures met and commerce flowed freely. The had always protected it, but the Collective's fleet was stationed weeks away. There was no one to stop the No one except the humans. The Defiance was an old ship. It had been built 60 years earlier during one of Earth's internal conflicts, and it had been officially decommissioned for almost 2 decades. Its hull was from 100 battles. Its engines wheezed and complained. By any reasonable measure, it belonged in a museum. But Admiral Tors did not believe in reasonable measures. She stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the fleet appear on her screens. Behind her stood Sergeant Danny Vega, now serving as her tactical officer despite the gray in his beard and the stiffness in his joints. Around them, the crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. The average age on the bridge was 56. Most of them had. None of them were afraid. "Admiral," Danny said, his voice calm and steady, "enemy fleet is in range. They're hailing us." "Put them through." The screen flickered, and High General appeared. He was massive even for with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that burned with contempt. When he saw the old human woman standing on the bridge of her ancient ship, he laughed. "This is your defense, one broken ship crewed by fossils." His laughter echoed through the transmission. "I will give you one chance to flee, human. Take your pathetic vessel and run. Tell your people what real power looks like." Let him finish. Then she smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Danny's hand move instinctively toward his sidearm. "General," she said pleasantly, "I've been waiting for this conversation. You see, I've read your species' military doctrine. You believe in overwhelming force, superior numbers, crushing your enemies with sheer power. This is the way of the strong." "Yes, I thought so. That's why I only brought 12 ships." Blinked, his reptilian features twisting with confusion. 12 ships against 200. You are insane." "Possibly. But before you dismiss us entirely, General, let me tell you something about the people crewing these ships. Every single one of them is a combat veteran. Every single one of them has killed before. And every single one of them volunteered for this mission knowing they probably won't go home." She stepped closer to the screen, and her smile faded into something harder. "You attacked our colonies. You killed our families. You thought we were weak because we chose peace. You were wrong, and now you're going to find out exactly how wrong you were." She cut the transmission. The battle that followed would be studied in military academies for centuries. They had numbers, but the humans had something else. They had experience. They had creativity. And they had absolutely nothing left to lose. The first move came from Commander Ben Hayes, piloting a destroyer called the Vengeance. He was 61 years old, with a bad heart that his doctors said would kill him within a year anyway. When the flagship opened fire on his position, Ben didn't retreat. Instead, he accelerated directly toward the massive vessel, pushing his engines past their safety limits. "Ben, what are you doing?" Admiral Tors demanded over the comm. "What I should have done 30 years ago, taking the fight to them." The Vengeance slammed into the flagship's engine section at full speed. The explosion was visible from Eth Station. Ben's last transmission was a single sentence: "Tell my kids I kept my promise." The formation scattered in panic. They had never seen an enemy deliberately sacrifice a ship. They couldn't understand it. And in their confusion, the human fleet struck. Kate commanded a gunship called the Fury. Her crew of 20 veterans, most of them missing limbs or carrying old wounds, maneuvered through the chaos with precision that seemed impossible. Kate's artificial arm interfaced directly with the ship's targeting systems, allowing her to fire with inhuman accuracy. She destroyed 4 enemy vessels before they even knew she was there. Roberto Santos led a boarding team onto a carrier. His squad of 15 veterans, armed with weapons that were technically illegal under collective law, cut through the alien crew like a scythe through wheat. The soldiers were younger, faster, stronger. It didn't matter. Roberto and his people had been fighting wars since before most of these aliens were born. They knew tricks that weren't in any tactical database. Chris, the baker from Luna, had found a new role. His steady hands and patient nature made him perfect for operating the Defiance's long-range weapons. He sat at his station for 7 hours straight, methodically picking off enemy ships one by one. Each shot was precise. Each shot was lethal. And each shot was dedicated to waiting at home. The battle raged for hours. Human ships were destroyed. Human lives were lost, died when her cruiser's reactor was hit. Danny went down fighting when soldiers boarded his vessel. Susan Park rammed her crippled transport into an enemy carrier, buying time for 3 other ships to escape. But for every human who fell, the lost 10, 20, 30. When the shooting finally stopped, 93 ships were destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 8 vessels. Admiral Torres, bleeding from a shrapnel wound that she refused to let the medics treat, broadcast a message to the surviving enemy ships. "This is Admiral Torres of the human fleet. Your attack has failed. Your fleet is broken. Go home. Tell your leaders what happened here today. Tell them what humans are capable of when you threaten what we love." She paused, her voice dropping to something cold and final. "And tell them this: we spent a century being kind. We showed you our gentle side because we wanted to, because we chose to, but that choice can be changed. So go home, General, go home and pray that we decide to be kind again, because if we don't—" She let the silence stretch out, heavy with promise. "You haven't seen anything yet." The surviving ships turned and fled. Not one of them looked back. On Eth Station, 3 million beings watched the human fleet hold position, protecting them from a threat they couldn't have survived alone. And for the first time in galactic history, the other species began to truly understand what humanity was capable of. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it was only the beginning. The Empire fell apart within 6 months. It did not collapse because of human attacks. The human fleet never fired another shot after the Battle of Eth Station. It collapsed because the own subjects rose up against them. For centuries, they had ruled through fear. They had conquered dozens of smaller species and kept them obedient through violence and intimidation. But when word spread of what had happened at Eth, when the stories of 50 old farmers defeating 5,000 soldiers reached every corner of space, something changed. The conquered peoples looked at their masters with new eyes. They saw that they were not invincible. They saw that bullies could be beaten. And they remembered that they had teeth too. The rebellion started small, a protest on one world, a strike on another, but they grew quickly, fed by the hope that the humans had given them. Within 3 months, the military was stretched so thin trying to maintain order that they couldn't maintain anything at all. High General, the same commander who had laughed at Admiral Torres, sent a quiet message to human diplomatic channels. He did not ask for alliance or trade. He asked for help. "Send your peacekeepers," his message read. "Help us restore order, we surrender." It was the most humiliating moment in history. And humanity, despite everything they had done, said yes. Cole was among the peacekeepers who deployed to the former capital. He was 64 years old now, tired and aching and ready to go home. But when the call came, he answered. He always would. The work was hard and often frustrating. They looked at the human peacekeepers with a mixture of fear and resentment. They expected harsh treatment, brutal punishments, the kind of revenge they would have taken if the positions were reversed. Instead, they found something confusing. Spent his days helping rebuild damaged infrastructure. He organized food distribution to refugees. He sat with former soldiers who had lost everything and listened to their stories without judgment. When young children threw stones at him on the street, he didn't retaliate. He just smiled sadly and kept walking. A young officer named was assigned to work with his team. At first, he was hostile and suspicious. He had been taught all his life that other species were weak, that only strength mattered. He couldn't understand why the humans, who had proven themselves more dangerous than anyone had imagined, were now acting like servants. "I don't understand you," said one evening as they shared a meal of bland military rations. "You beat us. You could have destroyed us completely. Why didn't you?" Chewed his food slowly, considering the question. He was not good with words. He had never been good with words, but this felt important. "I've killed a lot of people in my life," he said finally. "In wars you've never heard of, on a planet you've never visited. I watched my friends die. I did things that still give me nightmares. And every time I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting something important." He set down his spoon and looked at the young alien with old, tired eyes. "But every time the killing ended the same way, with people like you and me sitting together trying to figure out how to live with what we'd done. The fighting is the easy part, son. It's everything that comes after that's hard. But if you had destroyed us, you wouldn't have to rebuild. You wouldn't have to share your resources. You could have taken everything. And then what? Wait for the next war. Watch another generation grow up with nothing but hatred." "No," shook his head. "I've seen that path. It doesn't lead anywhere good. The only way out is through. You help your enemies become your friends, or you spend your whole life fighting." Was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and took one of the ration packets from his bag. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Sharing food was significant in culture. "You are very strange creatures," said. Smiled. "Yeah, we get that a lot." On the Ambassador Aura hosted a formal ceremony to welcome humanity into full membership in the collective. It was the fastest such acceptance in history. The other species had voted unanimously. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of humanity ever again. Commander Jack attended as the human representative. He was older now, walking with a cane from injuries he had received during the war. Dr. Lisa stood beside him, serving as translator and advisor. Behind them stood a small group of veterans, representatives of the thousands who had answered the call. Ambassador Aura gave a long speech about friendship and cooperation, and the bright future that awaited their united civilization. It was beautiful and formal and completely missed the point. When it was turn to speak, he kept it short. "We came to space looking for friends. We found them. We also found people who thought our friendship was weakness. They were wrong." He paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. "We hope we never have to prove that again, but we will if we have to." Afterward, Aura requested a private meeting with the human delegation. The crystalline ambassador seemed nervous, flickering with colors that Lisa recognized as uncertainty. "I must ask," Aura said. "We have reviewed your history more thoroughly now, your wars, your capacity for violence. How can a species capable of such destruction also produce such beauty, such kindness? How can you be both?" Lisa had been waiting for this question. She had thought about it for years, actually. Since the first time she met an alien who couldn't understand how humans could smile and kill with equal skill. "Because we remember," she said simply. "Every scar we carry, every grave we dig, every name on every memorial. We remember what happens when we let the darkness win. And we've decided, generation after generation, to choose something better." Stepped forward. He had not planned to speak, but the words came anyway. "We're not kind because we're weak," he said. "We're kind because we're strong enough to afford it. We've seen what we can do when the gloves come off, and we choose every single day to keep those gloves on." He met Aura's many-faceted gaze with his own tired eyes. "But don't mistake that choice for permission. Don't ever make that mistake again." The collective updated their official records on humanity that day. The old classification had been simple: peaceful traders, cultural producers, military nonentity. The new classification was different. Benign by choice, approach with respect. And across the galaxy, in the quiet spaces between stars, the warlike species grew still. They had seen the footage from Earth. They had heard the stories from Harvest 3. They had watched the Empire crumble before human kindness proved more devastating than human weapons. They were not afraid of human ships or human guns. Those things could be matched, given enough time and resources. They were afraid of what lived behind human eyes, the thing that could smile and heal and build, but could also destroy entire civilizations if pushed too far. The thing that chose peace not because it couldn't fight, but because it knew exactly what fighting meant. Humanity had shown the galaxy two faces, the gentle one that offered friendship, and the terrible one that came out when friendship was refused. Both were real, both were always present. And now the galaxy knew to be grateful for the first, and very, very careful never to summon the second. In the end, that was the lesson. Not that humans were dangerous. Any species could be dangerous, but humans were dangerous and kind. Humans were capable of ending civilizations and then helping rebuild them. Humans could kill you on Monday and bring you soup on Tuesday. That combination, that impossible balance, was what made them unique. And that was why, from that day forward, no one in the galaxy ever made the mistake of calling them weak again.